And what DePIN really does is be able to take the centralizing forces of the internet, which a lot of ways has accrued to 5 or 10 companies, and really be able to give people the opportunity to own a piece of the internet and push back on that centralization through contributing to a network. At some point, we really got to step up and be able to demonstrate, hey, this stuff is useful in these communities and we're here bringing it. And if you think about DePIN projects like GeoNet, like Helium, like Unikoi, you can create connectivity in a way that didn't exist ever before, or you can make it much more robust. You can create precise positioning networks that are really meaningful towards local farmers on the ground in places that get zero coverage from some of the bigger giants there.
Oftentimes now, after sort of building the proof of concept, you obviously need some footprint on the supply side when you're building out telco. But now when people go to deploy, it's really more about the fact that they know these locations will have demand from, the likes of an AT&T and other carriers. And we're sort of drawn out spots in Mexico where we expect Telefonica, Movistar coverage. So that demand leading supply is super, super exciting. All right, everybody. Welcome back to episode 3 of the Helium High Signal podcast. I'm your host, Sam Lewis from the Helium Foundation, and I am super, super excited with our guest today, the one and only Amira Valliani from the Solana Foundation. How you doing, Amira?
I'm great. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited to talk to you about a bunch of stuff. Specifically, I want to dig into your background in a second, but just for the audience, Amira's got a really interesting history working with policy as an entrepreneur. And so I really want to talk about sort of your outlook on DePIN in the US as well as globally. You had some really interesting remarks the other week about your framework for how telcos are operating more like fintechs, given their distribution, which I totally agree with. And then just sort of diving into what's interesting with DePIN today and moving forward. But getting started here, Amira, as I said, really, really interesting career path. I've known you for a little while. I didn't quite know the entrepreneurial journey. Tell me a little bit more about your sort of policy work, working as an entrepreneur, and how that led you to Solana.
I started off my career in policy in Washington, D.C., working in the Obama administration, and had a really incredible front row seat to history at that point. So I was primarily working on national security issues and really focused on communications. And national security communications is a really essential part of the national security apparatus, because what we say about what's happening on with security doesn't just have implications for people's knowledge, but it really has ramifications for how people interpret things all over the world, right? So if you say there's a red line that's going to be drawn somewhere, countries are going to react a certain way. If you make motions towards saying that you want to implement some sort of trade deal, countries are going to react a certain way. Corporations are going to react a certain way. And I really had the opportunity to sort of be at the center of all that at a really early stage of my career, including doing things like helping put together speeches for the President of the United States, for the Secretary of State. So really sort of incredible front row seat to history that I think gave me a lot of appreciation for how a lot of policymaking instruments are built, and loved it. Had an amazing experience, but I'd always had this startup itch. I grew up in Silicon Valley, and so when I wanted to sort of put my DC work aside, I went off and I started working on different startup-y type things. And I iterated through a bunch of different startup ideas, and was really focused the whole way on, how do you help the little guy do better? And so one of my first loves was podcasting in the space. Podcasting was blowing up at the time, and I really wanted to focus on how do we help podcasters make money. I was a podcaster myself, and so I created a podcast software company focused on helping podcasters be able to monetize what they're doing. We built a team, we raised some money, and then around 2021, we had a strategic exit, which was really exciting. And it was the kind of thing where I got the chance to step back a little bit and figure out like where I want my role to be in tech next. And I had been following crypto since 2017. That was sort of my first entry point into the whole ecosystem. But in 2021, things were blowing up again. And it was perfectly coincided with my chance to get back involved in the ecosystem. And was just sort of looking around at where the opportunities were. And I was really drawn to crypto for this idea of figuring out how we can make communal infrastructure, communal decisions really work in an economic sense. And so the idea of being able to create these mesh networks where you'd have these economically productive systems was really intriguing to me. And DePIN at that time was one of the most exciting parts about crypto. And that was that was like not pre DePIN, but it was pre a lot of people talking about DePIN. There were only a handful of topics out there. But as I got more and more into the space, fell into the Solana ecosystem, and I've been sort of in the Solana ecosystem for basically 4 years now. But yeah, started off in policy world.
That's awesome. And so how does that policy background sort of shape the way, if at all, that you think about sort of DePIN in the US or globally and its role in like an inclusive economy for everyone?
It's a great question. I think it's really at the heart of what I think is important for building a really strong, robust economy. We've had a lot of really incredible forces come about in the economy in the past, call it 20 or 30 years. But in a lot of ways, these have been both centralizing and democratizing forces. So, one of the key stories of the internet, especially in 2010, when I was in government, was around the democratizing force of the internet. So, I was sitting at the White House when the Arab Spring was happening. It was a really meaningful moment for me as someone who was in national security and spent a lot of time focused on the Middle East. And ostensibly like a really incredible story of people using democratic means to be able to speak out against their government. And then, as time went along, we realized the story wasn't quite that simple, right? There's a lot of complexities. And, the internet has been a democratizing force in so many different ways by giving people a lot of power. In this case, traditionally the power of information, both to be able to spread and learn information. I don't think the internet has lived up to its promise of economic democratization the way that we had all hoped. And, I think there's policy tools to be able to push up against that, but some of the best tools are market tools, right? And what DePIN really does is be able to take the centralizing forces of the internet, which a lot of ways has accrued to 5 or 10 companies, and really be able to give people the opportunity to own a piece of the internet and push back on that centralization through contributing to a network. And so DePIN, I think, is really core, that philosophy of how do we give people the opportunity to be able to compete in an increasingly centralized ecosystem and take these really high capex industries and break them open and make them more accessible.
Yeah, I totally agree. I kind of got into crypto around the same time as you, and Helium was like, like everyone else, there was Bitcoin and sort of like Ethereum, the Uniswap moment when I did my first swap. But then when I leveraged Helium for the first time, I really understood, oh my God, there's a chance that a group of people can have an opportunity to build and participate in, a global telecom network. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. So I want to just quickly touch on sort of your opinion of the current state of DePIN in the US versus globally and some of the differences between there. So I saw an awesome video from you guys. Some of you at the Solana team, I believe, some folks from Helium, some other DePINs going down to DC in the past few months. I'm curious, I feel like when you look at DePIN in the context of crypto, you feel like policymakers should think that it's one of the most productive use cases that can potentially be, just given that it's trying to expand, telecom, energy, you name it, access for all sorts of folks. I'm curious during your trips what the reception and the understanding of DePIN was, and if you've noticed a change from when you've been down there in the past.
I think DePIN is always received so warmly, and it really disarms policymakers. The policymakers are traditionally crypto skeptics. They expect you to go in talking about a trading ecosystem or a token, and they're kind of like, "What? You're trying to build a map? Like, how does this work?" I think they don't quite know like what to do with you at first. And when you sort of explain something like the fact that you're building a community-run telecom or community-owned map, it really helps them see that the potential of the ecosystem. And I think what's really special about the current moment we're in, and I think this has really only been true for the last 18 months, really, is there's really incredible proof points of how these community-run ecosystems can make a big difference. And for the first time, do one of two things. I think one is provide a really credible counterpoint to monopolistic behavior, which everyone in DC hates, right? Like no one is really excited about growing sort of monopolistic behaviors in the tech ecosystem or beyond that for sure. And the second thing it does is it creates a narrative around how DePIN can be used for national capacity. So one of the most interesting conversations that we had in DC this last time was the ability to use networks, in this case like Dawn, to deploy in cases of emergencies. where, let's say a hurricane has come across, wiped out a bunch of the cellular capacity, or you just need additional capacity, being able to deploy, Helium has done this before, Dawn hotspots, be able to basically swoop in and create connectivity in places where they really need it. And for whatever reason, a certain moment don't have it. It has a special resonance right now where when a lot of the sort of traditional, at least American infrastructure players in this ecosystem, for example, FEMA, NOAA, are being hollowed out, there's an opportunity to be able to sub in or complement national capacity with these distributed ecosystems that can be much more nimble and low capex in comparison to the structures that we had before.
Totally. And one of the things that's really exciting me is, working at the Helium Foundation, just like you over at Solana, think about the deployer communities a lot. And I'm increasingly seeing some of our deployers coming back to me and saying, hey, I'm starting to work with my local business associations in underserved areas, or I'm starting to work with, some of the local elected officials, and they're all excited about, helping me map out how we're going to deploy mobile coverage across the entire town. So it really feels like this fun exercise in community building as well.
It's so cool. Yeah. I mean, I think you asked about DC, but I think this is true everywhere. It's pretty easy to walk into almost anyone's office and be like, yeah, do you not love your local telco? There's sort of unification among services that people hate that tend to act like monopolies, right? And so to be able to say yeah, we're going to provide a credible counterpoint, or do you hate going to the mall or going to a concert and having terrible connectivity? We're helping sub in and making those networks more robust. People love that stuff. And when you can say hey, we have a way to do it that's not super expensive, it's really quick, it's super unifying. And so I think the thing that I think will really make crypto resonate with people, and that we need to do a better job of hitting on as an industry, is the fact that there's things that we all know are broken that we can use these tools to solve. The tools don't have a strong opinion, right? Not everything that's crypto is good, just not everything that's internet is good. But in general, these tools are pretty amazing forces and can be used for really cool ends. And so we should apply them that way. And I think when you talk about DePIN, it helps people start to appreciate what that could look like.
Totally. And in a second, I want to get into your telco specific tweet that you had mentioned. But first, I want to sort of step back. So we just talked about the US, right? And DePIN in the US is a little bit interesting in, I'd say, for example, the telco space, because we're really fortunate to have, pretty ubiquitous outdoor coverage in a lot of areas when it comes to cellular service. Indoor, not the same story. But in many ways, oftentimes carrier offload, for instance, in the case of Helium, can be an extension of what's already a pretty solid service. When you go to places like Africa or some of the emerging economies in the world, that's not always the case. So I'm curious if you have any perspective on how you think about DePIN opportunities in the US versus globally in some of those other areas.
We'll zoom out for a second. I think one of the things about crypto that is really difficult for a lot of my friends who are often crypto skeptics to understand is oftentimes the best use cases for crypto are in markets where we don't have near ubiquitous, solid infrastructure, near ubiquitous access to financial services. It is a really useful way to create open interoperable rails and accessibility for people who have not had that before. And I think DePIN falls in that category. I think the United States, in a lot of ways, has been the bleeding edge of DePIN because some of the strongest founders in crypto are here, because a lot of the best hardware communities are here, because it's where a lot of the capital formation is. And there's incredible use case in the United States. If you look at services like Helium, also HiveMapper, also GeoNet, also Ambios, nearly every DePIN has a really strong reason to be in the US. But I think for a lot of DePINs, that reason is amplified if you go to emerging economies that have had almost no infrastructure investment. The US, one of the things that's really difficult is our infrastructure in a lot of ways is in disrepair. It needs a lot of updating. And so DePIN can help speed up that process or supplement what already exists. In a lot of parts of the world, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, the infrastructure never exists in the first place, or it's really thin. And I think what's really special about DePIN is it creates this really fast and really low cost way to be able to come in and offer a lot of that infrastructure. Is it going to be a complete replacement for everything? No. But I think a lot of emerging economies with the age of the internet have showed us that there's potential for leapfrog beyond what we have in economies like the US really quickly by introducing some of this new tech. So I think this is what you're referring to. There was recently a DePIN Summit in Africa, which EV3 put on. And I have the utmost respect because I think traditionally a lot of the crypto community, like we talk a big game about being able to provide accessibility for people that haven't had it before. But if you actually look at where the dollars are going, where the emphasis is, we don't do any of that, right? Sorry, that's like an overstatement. We don't do enough of it for a community that talks about the importance of being able to create a more accessible financial system. Usually we're doubling down on the richest places and the places with the most accessibility. And that's fine. That's how the game goes in a lot of ways. But at some point, we really got to step up and be able to demonstrate, hey, this stuff is useful in these communities and we're here bringing it. And what was very cool about the EV3 Summit is they put the stake in the ground in East Africa. They did dual locations, Zanzibar and Mombasa. And they brought in DePIN companies that could have a big impact on the region, but they also worked with a lot of local entrepreneurs there. And if you think about DePIN projects, like GeoNet, like Helium, like Onakoi, like, you can create connectivity in a way that didn't exist ever before, or you can make it much more robust. You can create precise positioning networks that are really meaningful towards local farmers on the ground in places that get zero coverage from some of the bigger giants there. And because DePIN is traditionally, much cheaper and much more responsive to supply needs on the ground, you can really figure out, or you can see an endpoint where DePIN is maybe the first to create some of this infrastructure, or really strengthen some of these infrastructure in places like sub-Saharan Africa. So I think it's an incredibly important industry for that part of the world.
Totally. And it's really interesting how DePIN is so flexible in the build out, right? Like you could theoretically add and remove, and it almost makes the concept of adding something like a connectivity less daunting of a project to even start. And yeah, I was talking to some entrepreneurs that were at that event. I'm sad I missed it. And they were saying, in those markets, some people spend as much, if not more, on their connectivity than they do on rent. Yeah, it is super interesting. I was listening to a podcast of a Web2 investor from a really great fund, and he had mentioned how he really wants to keep investing in places like Africa, but his investments haven't been that great there. And it's just interesting, like maybe the infrastructure hasn't been there to facilitate some of like the always online outcomes that are needed for some of those software businesses. So maybe DePIN's the groundwork that's needed there. But shifting gears a little bit. Wanted to talk about a great tweet you had related to telcos increasingly operating as fintechs, because obviously this is the Helium podcast. So you wrote, increasingly, telcos will integrate crypto into their business to deepen their financial relationship with their customers and cut CapEx. And you gave a couple examples here. Can you walk us through some of these and sort of globally what you meant by this?
Yeah, I think what I meant is I think that crypto integrations with telcos and mobile carriers is an inevitability. And it's inevitability because crypto has the potential to be able to make these businesses operate much more efficiently on the back end. There can be cost cutting there, but also because they can provide sort of uniquely new financial services to their customers, and with that grow their share of wallet and sort of grow sort of the way that they're seen as businesses. This isn't a new idea. So especially outside the United States, a lot of telcos sort of operate like banks and provide a lot of financial services as is. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? So 8 billion people in the world, maybe 7.5 billion of them have phones. And this is people, people are looking at their phones all day. They get all kinds of services from their phones. And there's no reason that they shouldn't be getting financial services on their phones. The difference is in the US, traditionally, these things have been sort of distinct services. In a lot of emerging markets, these services are married with each other. And part of that is because telcos have evolved very differently. They're much more agglomerated in other parts of the world. Part of it is that in other parts of the world, there's much more of a top-up approach to telco. So like instead of having sort of flat fees for monthly plans, you might pay X amount for a certain amount of gigabits. And so you just have to be sort of interacting with your telco much more. And because of that, people might switch telcos a lot more. So they're looking to offer more types of services towards their customers. But that's all to say that I think if you look at what happened in, I think, 2007 in East Africa, Africa was actually one of the first places in the world, if not the first place in the world, where you actually saw mobile money take place. And so it was M-Pesa via Safaricom that integrated mobile money into the telco experience for people on the ground in East Africa. And it makes sense, right? Like it was really difficult to send money from place to place in East Africa. It was difficult in the US too, but it was way more difficult in East Africa at the time. And all of a sudden you have this novel tool that you can integrate with cell phones and mobile money emerge. And now if you look at Safaricom as a business, I think it's something like 41% of revenue comes from M-Pesa. They're basically like peer-to-peer money movement services. Over $1 trillion a year gets moved through mobile money services globally. And so these are really important revenue drivers for these telcos. And I think what we're going to start to see is like blockchain rails can facilitate all that mobile money, but it can do it cheaper. It can do it more flexibly by making things like cross-border payments easier. It can facilitate certain types of financial services. You can give people opportunities to access stablecoin yields in a way that you didn't before. And so that integration to me is going to be natural. But I think on top of that, what you're going to see is a few other things. One is I think you're going to see integration of like X to earn apps in mobile phones. And DePIN is, I think, at the tip of the spear of this, right? So there's opportunities in some markets where you can actually have types of Helium integrations that you might integrate into a carrier super app that gives that user the opportunity to earn some type of token just by being on their phone. There's tons of apps like that in the crypto world that give people the opportunity to create some kind of service through virtue of their GPS location, AI data collection, being able to create some kind of like uptime link. All those things give people the opportunity to earn extra and onboard them into the blockchain economy. And so I think we'll see more and more of that happen. And of course, on the operational side, things like Helium and decentralized wireless carrier offloading are amazing for helping cut costs, be able to project and expand connectivity in places where it doesn't exist earlier. And so to me, I think like this is something we'll see in the next 3 years in a massive way.
It is really cool to think, like you could, by deploying a Helium hotspot or, being a Helium mobile mapper or any of the other DePIN products that can use your phone, you can really build a small sort of nest egg of tokens on blockchain rails to sort of on-ramp yourself without needing to get any money from outside the crypto ecosystem, which is a really cool thing. Yeah, I think I'm super interested to see what Santiago Santos and the Inversion Capital folks do. Because I think that's exactly sort of their premise, right? I think last I heard on X with everyone else is they're evaluating investment opportunities in telcos in some of these regions like Latin America with that same purpose, right? I think I've seen him tweet that distribution is king. So
yeah, I give Santiago like a lot of credit for this idea, and it's something I've dug into more and more as I've gotten to meet other people from telcos. But the thesis makes a lot of sense to me, right? Like their play is a private equity approach to buying businesses and converting them into ways that take advantage of the business of blockchain. And the way that Santi pitches it is almost like, evangelism, right? This is how we bring crypto to billions of people. And I think that's right. But also like, forget like the evangelism, like this is good business practice for a lot of telcos to figure out how they can take advantage of these like global rails that make money move much more quickly, like provide additional services to their customers and create sort of a new ecosystem. And they should be doing this. And so I think we're just going to see it.
And on the back end, like you said, cut the costs, right? Like given, depending on contracts you have with the carriers. Yeah,
massive piece of it is to be able to cut the cost of data offloading, not to mention like all the operational efficiencies if you like start to move money in stables and everything else. Like there's so much you could do, but I think that the sort of 1-2 punch of carrier offloading and being able to offer your customers some kind of like stablecoin savings opportunity plus maybe like other earnings through other dApps, I think that's massive.
Gets a little bit more interesting also if you actually deploy some of the hotspots and you get the earnings back. I'm curious, why do you think that there is just too many good services within the US for these sort of telco-based value-added services to happen here? Or do you think it's inevitable in the US as well?
The integration of like blockchain and carriers.
Yeah, like an MVNO service with an app, exactly.
I think we'll see it here. Like I think we'll see telcos play much more into the fintech space. I think there's a couple of things happening in the US, right? One is I think um, my understanding is the market is much stickier. So it's really difficult to get people to switch between phone plans in a way that I think in other markets, because they're more top up oriented, especially emerging markets, the switching costs are way lower. And so being able to offer sort of like new product suites might get people to switch over more and more. I think the second is like from a regulatory perspective, only just now have we seen regulatory clarity in the US around stablecoins. And we'll start to get that more towards market structure, I think. But a lot of these companies are sort of standing by and waiting for the government to do anything. And if you're Verizon or AT&T, like the last thing you want to do is jeopardize your existing business by integrating crypto. And so I think it's a lot more difficult to do. And the third thing is, as you said, right, like people have much more robust access to financial services differently, and they have different types of they have much more robust access to financial services in the US compared to a lot of places internationally. And it's not as difficult to be able to sort of access these services. And so they haven't traditionally married the opportunity to get these services with their telco. They just get them from somewhere else. And because those services like exist in such abundance, there's the competition framework is just pretty different.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see what happens with inversion and any other telcos across the globe. If you're interested, hit us up. We're looking to make this a truly global network.
Yeah. And if you're a telco that's interested in figuring out how you get on blockchain, hit me up and we can talk all about it.
Exactly. Cool. So want to switch gears before we get to our lightning round, just to a broader DePIN discussion, given sort of your role and the visibility you have. Over at Helium, we're focused on sort of the wireless aspect, but Solana's crushing it with DePINs. It's obviously the home of DePIN. I think that's sort of like universally understood now in the crypto world. You've got, Grass, Dawn, Rome, Gradient, many, many others. What's most exciting to you right now? You don't have to call out single projects if you don't want to play favorites, but in terms of categories.
I'll call out two. One is I think there's tons of growth in the idea of using DePIN for AI data collection. We're just seeing a ton of companies there, both sort of like web crawling based data collection. So everything from text crawling to human use data collection of like actually tracking what you're doing when you click around on a website, but also physical AI data collection. So companies like Photobots, like Reborn, are using physical robots or sort of like physical presences to collect data to inform the future of drones, of humanoid robots, of self-driving cars. That's like more natives in Rome. And I think that's a really rich ecosystem, just like everything else in AI that's like full of ideas. And it's kind of unclear how it's going to shake out, but there's a ton of dynamism and a ton of fun stuff happening. And I just love learning about it. So that's one place I think is really cool. The second is a category I think of as DePIN for critical infrastructure. And to me, like this is the boon of DePIN in terms of helping fix a lot of the problems that we face today, which is, as I mentioned, like a lot of our infrastructure is quite brittle. I think COVID helped demonstrate how critical infrastructure, has gaps in it. There's a lot of centralization that makes it really difficult to operate. It's not terribly nimble. And I think DePIN helps us address a lot of those problems. Like I said, I'm not someone who thinks that you should replace government wholesale, but I do think you have opportunities to be able to complement what government does, make it more quick, and actually be able to sort of augment it in a lot of ecosystems in the world. And that narrative is just starting to emerge. And so some of the places that I think it's pretty interesting is, for example, DePIN for supply chain tracking. So being able to use DePIN tools to be able to track like where airplanes are, where ships are, where cars are, be able to understand like in real time where a lot of different goods are around the world. So you can create a more resilient global infrastructure in terms of tracking what's going on, be able to be more nimble about like where goods are and sort of allocate resources. I think that stuff is really interesting to me. I think like space DePIN sort of falls into a similar category there. So I'm seeing a growing number of DePIN companies that are noticing gaps in our space infrastructure that are really critical for national security, for resources like mapping, like GPS, and using DePIN to fill in gaps with things like satellite communications, like our telescope apertures, which don't capture a lot of what happens at the poles. We might have national security issues with like where satellites are in the world. These are places where when I put my former national security hat on, I think there's opportunities to do really cool things with distributed infrastructure in a way that has never existed before. And that's a story that I'm really looking out for and eager to see play out.
Totally. I was talking to the founder of SkyMapper, and like when I first heard about the idea, my initial reaction was like, this feels ridiculous. And then he sort of walked me through his experience at SETI and sort of like what you were saying, they're like huge gaps in being able to surveil this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, perfect use case.
SkyMapper is an amazing example of this, right? So founder SkyMapper, 30-year-long astronomer, was at SETI, like searched for ET, right? And he like started this, first he started a telescope company years ago, successful telescope company. Now he's starting like a DePIN for telescopes. And when I first heard this, I was like, oh, this is cool for academic purposes. What I started realizing, I chatted with him, is there's massive security and economic reasons that we need better global telescope coverage. What I didn't realize, there's satellites launched that if they're not tracked within, I think, a few days, they're just lost forever.
I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, lost forever. Not just that, imagine the threat of potential adversaries launching satellites into space that have all kinds of implications for global security, and just not tracking those because we have gaps in our visibility. I mean, really bonker stuff. Is to be able to use this idea of distributed telescopes. What's cooler is like you need telescopes at the poles. So he's actually working with a lot of indigenous communities to sort of make the revenue from telescope deployment is really critical. And it's an amazing use case of how being able to put this essentially mesh network of telescopes together is very cool for communities that are able to contribute to that network and really critical to the functioning of our global infrastructure.
What I loved about that one too is totally agree. And then on the complete flip side, the actual academic side, the ability to have always on sort of imaging of the stars where it's nighttime somewhere and apply AI and let students learn from it. Like the whole thing is just so cool to me. Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm curious. We've talked about a lot of the good things. Just looking forward, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for improvement in DePIN? So, I in my opinion, I think I tweeted about this actually early this morning. I still think there's a way to go in perfecting sort of the way DePINs think about their token distribution, specifically in the early days, and potentially, maybe layering on AI for some of these newer companies to sort of have a supply that grows in lockstep with demand. I'm curious, like, if there's anything that you think we could be doing better as a general community.
I'll offer in two ways. So one, your question on sort of tokens, I actually would go beyond that. Like I think a lot of founders really focus on the supply side of DePIN, which is great, right? That's like where a lot of the magic of DePIN is. But I would suggest if you're founding something in DePIN, start with the demand side, right? Figure out where your customers are and really focus. I would almost go as far as building the whole network around the needs of a potential 5-figure customer, like really servicing what they need and making sure you nail it down for them, and you can broaden out from there. Because I think we have a lot of supply coming online, but I think what's really difficult is to figure out how you sell that data or sell that access on the other end. And so I think from the perspective of starting really good businesses, and that's what I want to see from DePIN, is really smart, sustainable businesses that are adding value, really focus on who your customer is and work backwards from that in terms of building out your supply, not the opposite. The second thing is I think there could be a lot more done in the deployer community. So San, you were there. We put on like a deployer con in New York, which was really fun. We brought together sort of a proof of concept for a bunch of different deployers in the DePIN community. What you'll see is that there's a bunch of hobbyist deployers out there, but there's a handful of people who are building bigger businesses, are deploying sort of a lot of different hotspots or in a lot of different DePINs. And these are some of the most thoughtful people out there about the functioning of DePIN, right? Because they know very well the difference between putting a hotspot in a mall versus in a rural area, what you get from like a Helium versus XNet node, how you might think about going and deploying certain GeoNet nodes and like, the other side of the world, like really how to think about building businesses from there. And one, I think if we are going to scale DePIN as a whole, there just needs to be more sharing of those best practices. Like the deployers in some ways self-organize through Telegram groups and so forth. But I think there's a lot more that we can do to build basic scaffolding for them to get to know each other and teach other people how to become really good at their craft. And two, I think the deployers will tell founders and people operating in the industry a lot about their business and where the gaps are. And I think listening to deployers more and bringing them into the conversation, deployers should be involved in every DePIN conference and every sort of major congregation about DePIN. I think that is a really critical component of the network because it would be like having a rideshare business and never talking to your drivers. Like you just need to be able to understand like what the supply online is. And so there should be a lot more attention paid to that in the ecosystem.
Totally agree. I love that answer. We should actually catch up again in the fall because I've been thinking a lot about that. And yeah, I agree. There's almost like two different funnels. There's getting the person that's never deployed yet and is interested and just needs that initial education. And then there's sort of like the scaling of the entire operations. Some of these deployers are so impressive in terms of how much they do.
If it doesn't exist already, like I think we're going to move towards a world where it's kind of like 80-20 in DePIN, just like it is with the internet, or maybe 90-10, right? Which is 90% of the rewards and the locations will be done by 10% of the people who are actually participating in the network. And I think that's great. Like, I think the idea here is, if we're going to provide a credible counterpoint to monopolistic behavior, you need people who really depend on this stuff and who are building real businesses out of it. And so let's give them the power to do that and really help them as they build these businesses.
Yeah. We'll know we're starting to make it when there's more truly venture-backed operations building out these businesses. I'd love to see that from the deployer side. And yeah, just to quickly touch on your point about demand before supply, I think one of the most proud moments for us at Helium is, oftentimes now after sort of building the proof of concept, you obviously need some footprint on the supply side when you're building out telco. But now when people go to deploy, it's really more about the fact that they know these locations will have demand from the likes of an AT&T and other carriers. And we're sort of drawn out spots in Mexico where we expect Telefonica Movistar coverage. So that demand leading supply is super, super exciting. Well, cool. Want to do a little bit of a lightning round before we close up here. Are you ready to go on a few questions?
These are hard. Okay. Yeah, let's go through them. All
right. Lightning round. Here we go. Favorite moment working at Solana so far?
I showed up at Breakpoint 2021 as just like sort of a fangirl. That was the first Breakpoint. And, 6 weeks later, I was actually working at the Solana Foundation. And then the next Breakpoint, I was on stage emceeing like the opening session. So like everyone's out there, like huge crowd. Like I'm pumped. I'm like telling my story, like insane arc. And I run out there. And I'm just super excited, right? The adrenaline's going to me. And I just say, G fucking M. And I drop like an F-bomb in front of 4,000 people. My first words of the entire conference. So that was pretty awesome.
And that's who we had on national security communications over at the White House, the person.
Exactly. Yeah. The best and brightest.
Yeah. Cool. Next question. One DePIN project you think is really underrated and why?
We chatted about it a little bit with SkyMapper, but I'll like broaden it out. And maybe this is cheating a bit. I think Space DePIN is about to have a moment. So there's a company called Decent Space that just placed in the Coliseum Hackathon, and there's a couple of others sort of building in this suite, but are really focused on how do you bring the power of DePIN to be able to solve problems related to things like space communications, watching the sky, and I think that stuff sounds like pretty literally up in the air when you think about it. But the more I dig into it, the more I think this is such an exciting opportunity. And so, I would say don't sleep on Space DePIN.
I know some of them are a little bit above my pay grade, but yeah, I agree. Very, very interesting. Okay, if you don't have an answer to this one, but is there an area of crypto that you're sort of not bullish on? You sort of sit there and wonder, does this need blockchain, or you just don't think it's going to take off?
My bias when I see most things is to wonder whether or not it needs blockchain. And so, I think there's probably a lot here where I'm just like generally skeptical. I'll preface this by saying that there's a lot in crypto that like I'm so wrong about. And so like, I'm very prepared to say something and, be proven wrong, but I'm not convinced of the opportunity in gaming. I don't quite like understand where where it's going. And so waiting for someone to prove me wrong there. Because it was so much of the initial dream, right? Like, why should I have assets in one game and have them be stuck there and not be able to move them somewhere else? And to my knowledge, we haven't seen much changes there.
Agree. I do feel like there's a little bit more of like this works in theory than in practice with some of that stuff. And yeah, it seems like some of the games have started with Web3 audiences as opposed to like building a great game for gamers. There is one on Solana I got to call out. I love Photo Finish Live by Third Time Games. Yeah, so big fan of the horse racing.
Do you have a sector that you're not bullish on, or at least bullish on?
I'm still questioning some of the decentralized social stuff. I think that somebody will have a hit there eventually, but I'm just not sure that I see it manifesting in the ways that it's sort of come up yet. So for instance, like I actually really enjoy as a Web3 native being on Farcaster. I think it's really cool and interesting. I just think some of the network effects are so immense for these Web2 social networks that it's tough to overcome. And there's everyone always says in theory it'd be great to have, a decentralized Twitter with several different clients, but we've never really seen it happen. And I'm just curious to see where that goes. Cool. Last one. We were talking at the top of the episode, so I may already know, but before we started recording, but top summer plans.
I'm going to Alaska. I'm pumped to that. I'm going to go adventuring.
Dumb question is do you do stuff like whale watching in the summer? Or is that like more
yeah,
like
whales
fall?
come up in the summer when it's warm. So the way, I don't know if we have whale watching the agenda. I think we have kayaking, so we will see some whales there. But yeah, like whales come up in the summer to feast, and then they go down south in the winter where it's warmer to have their babies.
So fun. I'm jealous. I've always wanted to go to Alaska. Well, listen, Amira, thank you so much. I know you got to hop soon. Really, really, really appreciate having you on. And to all the listeners out there, just want to make a quick plug. We have a huge $50 million grant initiative over at Helium. And we would love for you to come and become a deployer, test it out, buy your first hotspot. So you can find that on helium.com/grant. And then excited for the next episode coming out after this. Going back to what we talked about, we're going to have a little deployer roundtable episode from some of the most entertaining deployers. We want to hear their goofiest deployment stories ever. So thanks, Amira, and take care.
I love it. Thank you, Sam.